All right, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to be giving you guys a deck tech for this deck I created for the historic format. Been having a lot of fun playing on Arena lately, and historic's been pretty cool actually, and even better now since the changes to the companion rule and stuff like that. So. Um, this is a deck that I created in Pioneer, and it actually just happens to carry over very well into Historic. For the most part, you get a lot of the same cards or very similar cards in Historic that you can use. So look out for that Pioneer deck tech and gameplay. I'll have that out soon for you guys if you're interested in the Pioneer version of this. But let's just get right into it here. This deck is called Sultai Dreadlands, and it is focused around the card Dread Presence. And Dread Presence says whenever a swamp enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. You get to draw a card and lose a life, or it can deal 2 damage to any target and you gain 2 life. And so, for this card to be relevant and good, you need to be one playing a lot of swamps or um, something that makes your other lands swamps, and you need to be able to play multiple lands per turn. So we'll just go starting from our 1-drop slot and move over, and we'll kind of see how everything in this deck ties together and makes this really cool, grindy, synergistic, and powerful lands matter deck for Historic. So in the 1-drop slot here, we got the Arboreal Grazer, and this just helps you get a little early game ramping going, get an extra land on the battlefield early on, maybe even go from 1 to 3 right away. So it's just better than Llanowar Elves and stuff like that. We're just trying to get lands on the battlefield is kind of what our game plan is here. In the 2-drop slot, we got things that mill us and fix our mana. And as you'll see, there's a good amount of graveyard synergy in this deck. The graveyard's very important to this deck as well. And so this card here, the Binding of Titans, this is kind of like my substitute for Satyr Wayfinder. And it ends up actually being better in some ways than Satyr Wayfinder in this deck. So the first chapter says each player puts the top 3 cards of their library in the graveyard. Chapter 2, you get to exile 2 cards from your opponent's graveyard. You gain a life for each creature. Not so relevant, but the incidental life gain is actually nice. And then Chapter 3, you get to return a target creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand, and that ends up being really good. The fact that you can grab a creature as well, or a creature instead of a land ends up being quite relevant sometimes in this deck. So running 4 of those, we got 4 Glowspore Shaman as well. Glowspore Shaman mills us, and then we get to put a land from our graveyard on top of our library. And then we got 1 Thassa's Oracle here. And the reason being is that this deck, once it gets going, ends up churning through the deck really quickly. And there's been points at which I've milled myself out, and points at which I could have kept playing my cards, but I needed to stop so I wouldn't mill myself out. So adding one of these in the deck just gives you an alternate win con to protect against that self-mill aspect of this deck, and it doesn't really matter. We can get it from our graveyard really easily if we mill it. So having 1 copy is plenty for this deck as well. Moving on to the 3-drop slot here. We got the Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and this card kind of is what makes Dread Presence playable. This will turn all of our lands into swamps as well as other land types as well, and we can play additional lands every turn. So that means everything we're dropping will be a swamp, including things like Fabled Passage. So you'll get a double trigger on Dread Presence there if you play Fabled Passage and crack it, which is really good. And then we got 3 Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. This feeds into our entire deck strategy as well here. We can mill Uro and still cast it from our graveyard. It is just a big beast, gains life, draws cards, lets you put extra lands on the battlefield, fits with the entire theme of this deck really well. So yeah, Uro's a powerhouse in this deck. Then we got 2 Crucible Worlds to be able to play lands from our graveyard, which is important with all of our milling. And then we got 2 Tameo, Collector of Tales, and she just lets you self-mill yourself, try to find something, return cards from your graveyard. Just works really well with the theme of this deck here. And then we got the other very important card to this deck in the 5-drop slot, one of my favorite cards here, the Gitrog Monster. And this is a 6/6 with Death Touch. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog Monster unless you sacrifice a land. You get to play additional land on each of your turns. And then whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. And the keyword being anywhere there. So when you sacrifice a land with Gitrog Monster, you'll get a draw card. When you mill cards from the top of your library with Glowspore Shaman, Binding of the Titans, Tameo, you'll draw cards there as well. So it just ends up being this huge draw engine for our deck, and also a big threat on its own. And it allows you to play extra lands and stuff for Dread Presence. And then another big powerhouse at the top end of our curve here is Muldrotha, the Gravetide. Very cool card from Dominaria. I'm really stoked to be playing this card. I thought this card was really cool when it first was spoiled out. And this is the perfect deck for it. So she says, or it says, during each of your turns, you may play a land and cast a permanent spell of each permanent type from your graveyard. And we have every permanent type in our deck here as well. We got artifacts, enchantments here, creatures, land, and planeswalker. So we get a lot of value out of Muldrotha there. And so all this deck, all the cards in this deck kind of come together to make this synergistic, grindy sort of mid-range lands matter sort of deck, which ends up being really powerful. And we got 27 lands in the deck to support this plan. And we are actually running 2 Field of the Dead as well. This is a card that's legal in Historic, but not in Pioneer. And just works really well in this deck as another way to make more threats and make your lands, your land drops count and matter even more. So it's 2 is might be the right number. You might be able to push 3. It gets a little awkward with like Uro having the double green, double blue in its cost. So that's something I'll have to play around with, adding possibly 1 more in. So far, 2 has not been hindering my ability to play this deck whatsoever, which is good. Other important lands in this deck are Fabled Passage, being able to trigger the Gitrog Monster, as well as Dread Presence twice if you have the Dryad out there, which is quite good. And then the last really important land here is Witch's Cottage, which is a swamp, and it'll come into the battlefield untapped if you control 3 swamps, and then if you do, you can put a creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. And this ends up being really good with Dread Presence, because if you stack the triggers correctly, you can put a creature card on top of your library and then draw that creature right away with Dread Presence. This card also works pretty well with Gitrog Monster as a repeatable way to get value out of your graveyard. You can sack this card and then recast it with replay it with Muldrotha or Crucible Worlds or something of that nature to continually get value out of your graveyard there. So yeah, that's the gist of the deck. I'll have some gameplay videos out here soon. There'll be a link in the description for the entire deck here. I'll just go over the sideboard quick. We might be able to update the sideboard a little better. This was kind of just a quick throw together here, but yeah, we just got a Ritual Soot and Maelstrom Pulse, Unmoored Ego, Ashioks for graveyards and stuff, a couple Murderous Rider, Mystical Dispute, Assassin's Trophy, and 3 Duress. If you like this video and you want to see more of my content, don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep your eye out for the gameplay video. I'll have that out soon. All right, thanks guys. We'll see you next time.